Thank you, Abby. So as Abby alluded to, this used to be a webinar, and I started Test of the Month, 7 years ago when I was still at MAD, as a try to share tests among the community and what's going on in the scientific literature and how can we all learn from each other. So the goal from changing from that, from a presentation format, and here's one person talking about their tests, is knowing that all of us have tests that are valuable that we hopefully can share, or at least ask questions and drill into some of these more. So we're hoping that this will lead to more question asking, more commenting, more suggesting related tests, more presenting yours. You're not expected to have slides. You can just say, hey, we did that, got a 17% lift, or hey, we tried that, and we will never do it again. Here's why. All of that helps hopefully make us all a little smarter when we get done with it. So any questions on any of that? So jump on in as you have questions, as you have comments, as you have relevant tests. I did put together a few more slides than I hope to for the future this first time around, just because, hey, it's the first time around. No one else, we're all figuring this out together, but wanted to go on the theme of omni-channel. And so I have kind of 3 sections, one talking about how attribution may be able to open up some new audiences. The other is, second is subtractive. What happens when, sorry about this, what happens when we take out channels, and maybe there are some channels that we don't need to be using, and then the additive power of omni-channel. What happens when we build in what happens when we build in that multi-channel outreach to a donor, and how does that potentially raise all votes? And then other omni-channel questions, tests, all of that welcome, and as well as questions throughout. Does that sound like a good run of show? Seeing a thumbs up, hearing no violent threats. So here we go on omni-channel. So specifically want to look at attribution and how it can change our perspective of older donors, because this is the article of faith, and it's usually very correct, is that older donors are the best donors. However, there's some evidence that the older donors are not as good as the younger older donors, which is to say, once you hit a certain age, and that age would be different for everyone, but the research that I linked to down below kind of looks at about 75 plus, you start to decline in health. You start to actually, let me show the slide. So you decline in health. Over that time, you have declined cognition over that time, and you have decreased religious attendance, which we know is often predictive of charitable giving, in part because some of those folks are giving to their church, and in part because it talks about ties to the community. And so you have decreased ties to the community, and you may not be giving as much. Declined health means that you may be investing more in your health, saving for that treatment or what have you. And so this study finds that there is potentially a drop-off in giving at about that 75 marker. And we've talked about the challenges of some of the modeling that we do. When we do linear modeling, it says the older and older you get, the better off you get, and the most charitable day that you will have is the day right before you die. And that may not be the case. In fact, there may be a slope down, and so it's why we want to go to more robust modeling than just correlation, regression, linear systems, to be able to say, hey, some of these have too much of a good thing is not in fact a good thing. So where are our younger donors? This is one client that we looked at, and you look at male revenue, and here are your old standbys. Best per 1,000 is your 70 plus, 70s-year-olds. Next best is your 80-year-olds. And it drops off as you get younger and younger and younger. fewer and fewer people are given to the mail. And this is the graph that we see all the time. So we said, what happens when you take this graph and you look at the people who are mailed in an acquisition audience, so they haven't heard from the organization before, presumably, and you look at their online revenue. Did they go and give online? And so you add in the online revenue, and all of a sudden your 50-somethings and your 60-somethings pop up above your 80-somethings. And hey, the 40-somethings are not that bad a group to be going after. Moreover, and this is as an old mail guy, so take it with a grain of salt, it also kind of talks about the value of mail. Hey, those web revenues that you were looking at that come in as white mail, but not mail, those that come over the transom may not be just random gifts. They may not be people, hey, stopping by the site and saying, hey, I want to donate to X today. They may be because someone got a mail piece. So we wanted to see if this would hold up. So a different organization, looking at their attribution, you can see that their cost per dollar raised when you put online into it was lowest among 30 to 70-year-olds. In fact, there was that drop off among 70-somethings and 80-somethings that we talked about it. And it's because if you look over on the right, fully almost 70% of the gifts given by people under the age of 40 because of mail were online gifts. Even among 40-somethings, more than half of the gifts made from a mail piece were made online. And so if you're not looking at those online gifts, you're not getting the full benefit of what is the full benefit of mail. And you're not getting full benefit of what are these groups that we haven't reached out to in the past, because, you know, this organization, probably wisely given the information that they had, only mailed 600,000 people in their 30s, compared with 6.7 million people above the age of 80. Every person above the age of 80 they mailed, the cost to raise $1, this is an acquisition, $2.70 versus $1.80 essentially for 30-somethings. And it's because they were looking at only the mail graph to make those decisions. So this is a third organization, similar sort of offline revenue graph that you have here. But for them, the 50-somethings are the #1 audience when you incorporate online gifts. It went from 70s are the best, followed by 80s to 60s. And you can see over on the side, it was 50s followed by 40s, followed by, actually this is 50s followed by 60s, followed by 40s. So there's a sweet spot for the mail that is different from what it looks like it is if you separate mail is the channel of influence and other channels could be the channel of transaction. And I just spoiled my first bullet point. The second thing here is that this is even more dramatic for some other things. For DRTV, you fully expect that most of the gifts that you will get from a DRTV campaign aren't from that toll-free number. They're from people who see the ad and then go online. And you can run attribution that's, hey, within 5 minutes of an ad, dropping in a market, let's attribute over and above digital gifts to the DRTV campaign. We don't expect that someone's going to always call that number. And so there's this increasing importance of testing channels for true-ish incremental revenue. And then if this is true for age, it's probably true for other variables. And oh, by the way, it is. When you do mail attribution for this one client, Colorado looks like revenue per index 99. So it is an entirely average mail response state. When you incorporate digital revenues to an index of 134 as the #1 online revenue state. So you get 34% more mailing someone from Colorado than the average. And if you're looking only at the mail results, it looks like, Colorado, they're fine. You get these, if you'll pardon the pun, mile-high results. Also true for wealth. you may say, oh, those donors who are don't have a lot of income, they're living on a fixed income, perhaps those are our best male donors. Someone who's making less than $15,000, they're living on their savings, for example. Those are our best donors. Well, if you incorporate online, your best donors, not a shock, are also your highest earners, those making more than $124,000 a year for this organization. And so that type of attribution valuable across the board. So, stop sharing so we can see each other for a second. Other tales of cross-channel attribution that you've done that have brought in interesting results, or questions on what you've seen?
Nick, I have a question, and I'm sorry if I missed this. First of all, I do not pardon that pun. That was terrible. You can do better. But how are you calculating the attribution?
So these are all in acquisition results. So thankfully, we have the acquisition file, and then we can then take the acquisition file and go to the online transactions, which within, depending on, and I should confess that these are different organizations, so they have different attribution rules, but it's usually a 30 or 60-day window post-mail piece.
To the acquisition promotion file.
Yes. So
okay.
Take the acquisition promotion file, look within that window, 30 or 60 days, to see if they made an online gift, and then attribute that gift back to the mail piece, not taking it out necessarily of the revenue, but looking for attribution purposes.
Yep. And then is that how you can do it for DRTV as well?
DRTV, it's a little bit more complicated because you're not going after individuals, you're going after a channel or a market. And so with DRTV, we will usually say there are a few things at play. You look at the place. If there is a location specific where the ad ran, that's helpful. Not always the case. A lot of these are national buys. You look at usually a 5-minute window following the ad, and you look for not the amount that comes in, but the lift over a comparable amount of time. So if you ran an ad in Colorado, I don't know why I'm picking on them today, but if you ran an ad in Colorado on Tuesday, 8:53 a.m., you would look at Tuesday, 8:53 a.m., the week after, the week before, run, not literally, using some more sophisticated algorithms that I'm using here, but figure out what a baseline is, and then what's the jump over and above that. Okay,
that's perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem. And that gets into a theme that we're going to be talking about. So much of attribution is complex formulas and things like this. What we're really looking for isn't necessarily attribution, but incrementalism. What is the incremental result I get from doing X? And that can be done through attribution, and you can fight over, well, this was a mail gift, you should push it over to my part of the P&L and all of that. That's less important than figuring out and doing a full accounting for, hey, if I shut off mail, here's what happens to digital, and vice versa. Other questions and comments? Let me turn it back around for those like Stephanie, like Richard, like many of you on this call who are data experts in your own right. Is this kind of consistent with what you've been talking about in terms of attribution and incrementality?
So I would say we live in a parallel universe, Nick, right? We are having the same sorts of conversations with our clients around what the balance is and looking at overall audience value versus overall campaign or channel attribution. And both things may be important to the organization, but I think organizations are still sort of grappling on how to make that actionable for future campaign planning, because expenses and audiences don't necessarily match up very well in their finance systems.
Yeah. Finances, do we have any finance people on the call? Okay, finance is the enemy. Of so many of these things, and you get into some organizations that have different, possibly even odd business rules. One of my acquaintance said that mail has 3 years to break even, digital efforts must break even immediately. And it's like, why do you care? The ideal, and finance people won't think like this because they'll think about cost of fundraising and things like this. But if you had a magic box and you could put $1 into the magic box and get $1.10 out, first you'd ask, is this a personal use magic box or is it just a professional use magic box? Because I have, Tahiti sounds nice. But assuming it's a business magic box, you'd feed dollars into that all day. And it doesn't matter if it's a mail dollar or a digital dollar. You're looking for, how do I spend the next dollar? So maybe I'll get $1.11 out. And the finance person says, well, you have a budget for your mail and a budget for your digital, and it pre-silos your thinking. And so hopefully what this webinar will do will give you another cudgel to go and say, boom, boom, boom. Dollars are fungible. It says right on the dollar bill, this can be used for all debts, public and private, can be used as a digital dollar or a mail dollar or DRTV dollar, and we don't care. It gets you to a better result, and that's what the result we're going for. And that result is not a super pretty 990. It's lives saved and lives changed. Thank you for bringing up an excellent point there.
Yeah, and I think that people who can start to look at it that way, who have the luxury, there's more of an acceptance of the idea that direct mail is valuable in its own right for influencing and not just for it being a quantifiable, ATM of fundraising.
Yeah, and you've hit upon the absolute flaw in the magic box analogy, which is that donors aren't ATMs. And when you treat them like ATMs, they stop paying out like ATMs. And so it is definitely more of an experiential move that we're going for in a lot of our mail pieces. And would love to hear your ideas as we go through for future topics. One that I just saw an interesting case study on was what happens when you add cultivation pieces. Is cultivation worthwhile? And that may be something that a lot of folks have as case studies on the call. But that also could be your 37th most interesting topic, and you have 36 others that you'd like to throw out. So shout them out as you have them.
So it's actually interesting, Nick. We just finished a year-long test with a client where we looked at their mid-market program, and we had one group that just got more direct mail pieces. They got the same 12 asks, maybe on nicer paper, and then the test group got a major gift sort of treatment, right? They got 11 cultivation pieces, ending up with more of a campaign ask at the end of the year. And what the results were dollar-wise over the 12 months, even Steven. And the people who had the campaign ask were ready for pipeline development into major gifts. The people who were in the direct mail sort of stream were still ready for their, $100 a month every time or whatever it may be. So organizational objectives is really important, right? Do you need major gift folks or not?
Yeah, and the study I was looking at, similar sort of thing. The 3-month results would make you run for the door.
Yep.
The 18-month results look fabulous.
Folks are not very patient with major gifts and pipeline. That's why we love mail. You know what you're spending, you know what's going to come out. Those spreadsheets don't lie.
Oh, I've I've tortured a spreadsheet in my time, and it would confess. It'll confess to anything if you hit it hard enough. Okay, let's talk incrementality. Since I teed this up, this is not a nonprofit study, but it's a fascinating one. It's from eBay. And they wanted to test, what are we getting from our search engine ads? So the first one that they did is they stopped advertising on the term eBay, branded ads. And we all on our Google grants run branded ads. It makes sense to, because they have super high click-through rates. But when eBay removed their branded ads, they lost 0.5% of their traffic. So 99.5% of their traffic found that eBay was still the first result when you clicked eBay, and people clicked it anyway, whether there was an ad there or not. Now, eBay, strong brand name, may not apply to everyone, especially if you're the second thing that comes up when people search for you, but interesting nonetheless. So then they said, hey, what about our non-branded ads? What if we stop running search engine ads? And so they did it in 30% of markets. So obviously, attributed sales fell off a cliff. They declined by 72%. Now, why didn't attributed sales fall by 100%? Because, hey, there was nothing to attribute them to. DMA and markets are imprecise things. There's media flop over from one market into the next. This is 2012, and so it isn't connected TV and things like that. But, if you are you may get ads in Nashville for the Memphis market and vice versa. And so, hey, there's a little bit of attributed sales left. So if you look at this graph and you present this graph, you go, holy moly, possibly something stronger than moly in there. We need to keep doing these search engine ads. These are the total sales. And the yellow line is the logarithmic difference between the markets where they had ads and the markets where they didn't. And it doesn't seem to move that much. And then red is the ratio of on and off, and the green line is the on where they had ads minus where they didn't have ads. None of those lines look like they make that much of a difference. And so when they did the full attribution of this out, they thought they had a 1,500% ROI on their ads from their attributed sales. When they took them out and didn't see sales go down, they actually had a negative 63% ROI on its ads. And so the challenge that goes with this subtractive idea of attribution is, are we improving on silence? There's other studies that say that something like 63% of the revenues that go with a new mail piece, if you had 12 mail pieces you were sending throughout the year, you plunked a 13th one down in there, 63% of the revenues that mail piece will get that are attributable to that mail piece that someone mailed in the reply device, you would have gotten anyway through the piece before it or the piece after it if that piece didn't exist. And so how do we check to make sure that we are improving on the silence? So anyone have any tests like what eBay did, where they took out a channel, took out a mail piece, took out an effort, and what that did, whether that was positive or negative? Or questions? A little bit of a weird example because it's eBay and not a nonprofit side, but hopefully it has some nonprofit-ish implications. This is something I know that we were talking about with one potential client. I work on our RFPs here. I was working on an RFP until 30 seconds before this call, and 30 seconds after, I'll be working on a different one. But one of the things that we noticed when we went through their data is that they had added so many pieces over the years, the least performing ones barely breaking even on a net perspective. And our thinking is that if you culled the forests a little bit, if you pulled out those, your net revenue would go up. Because those revenue, most of those revenues would go to other pieces. And
I'm not
yes,
sure I understand.
yes, you wouldn't have that attributable revenue, but you would still have the overall revenue like in eBay. So let's go to the flip side of this, talking about the added effects of channels. And so these are culled from a few different, some willing to directly attribute, some wanted non-anonymized results, but Shriner's Children's shared some of these results. So they added digital ads to their acquisition mail. And here's what they saw in the mail: 72% increase in response rate, 11% increase in average gift, and over a 10 return on ad spend. So for every buck they put in, they got $10.45 out. So they were happy with that, needless to say. Oh, sorry, that was on the donor side. This is on the acquisition side. They started that digital ad co-targeting in both English and Hispanic. The English campaign, the ads broke even in acquisition online transactions alone. For the Hispanic targeted Hispanic English, there was a 65% lift in response. The Hispanic Spanish was an 185% lift. And so the average gift increases across all languages when you have that co-targeting. So the digital ads there didn't pay for themselves in and of themselves, but they more than paid for themselves by the impact that they had on the net on donor side. And so this was in 2021. They obviously went into greater co-targeting in 2022 because, hey, if it works, you do it. They also targeted lapsed DRTV donors with programmatic TV. You know, one of our cardinal rules is failing everything else to reacquire that lapsed donor, and you go back to what worked before, that channel that worked before, the message that worked before, the timing that worked before. Hey, it worked before at least once. And if you have no other data to go on, thankfully we do in most cases, but if you had no other data to go on, that's great stuff. And so they said, how do we lapse DRTV donor? Well, we can target them in the channel that they came from. We can target them on TV. They are a TV responsive donor. And so that return on ad spend was positive, netted positive in the initial donations. And this is reacquiring monthly donations. So you know that if there's a positive return on ad spend at the initial part, that'll amortize, that'll pay for itself over and over and over again. Another health charity was doing a similar sort of thing, targeting lapsed DRTV donors with programmatic TVs, but they were initially doing it full file. And so their cost to raise $1, they were not netting positive. They were probably netting positive in the long term, yay, 18 months, 24 months out, because it's a monthly gift. But their cost to bring in a donor was $53, a lower average gift. So then we scored the file for them. We said, the correct answer is almost never full file. Any sort of improvement that you can have on mailing or emailing or digital adding or DRTVing, those are not verbs, but hey, work with me here. Anytime you can not full file those folks, you're probably better off. Sure enough, the scored segments, average gift went up, cost per donor went down to $33 per. And so the cost to raise $1 down below the 50% threshold. So more than doubling the money on the outset. Yes, with a smaller audience. And so this is one where we would probably go back to them and say, hey, you did decile, and I don't know what deciles they did. You did deciles 1 and 2. Let's try 3. Because, hey, you could do worse than this and still make good money. Different health charity, they did the whole ball of wax. They did mail plus email plus programmatic TV plus digital ads. So I promised omni-channel. This is not quite omni. We didn't have a face-to-face person show up at their door. There's not radio in there. 0 carrier pigeons, but no fax campaign, but pretty good for omni-channel. So this is lapsed mail donors, these are lapsed digital donors, and these are super dupes. So good prospects, but not, these are not active file donors. They found that they got $155,000 in gross revenue and a 2.6, call it, return on ad spend for their digital ads. The gross revenue, I don't know the exact cost. I do know that it netted positive in the mail. So yes, I'm committing the sin that I talked about earlier. I'm talking about different channel results in different budgets. But here, because we did the whole ball of wax at once, you can't say, oh, this is a programmatic ad buy, this is digital ad buy, Stephanie.
So for the return on ad spend, is that the entire ad spend regardless of channel?
That is the programmatic and digital ad spend. That is
Okay.
not, that is digital ads in some form, whether streaming or,
Okay.
or static. It doesn't include the mail cost, the mail netted positive. And I don't know how email did because there's not a lot of marginal cost in there. I believe that's lumped into the gross revenue number.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So, any other questions or any other studies you've had about the additive effects of channels? I tried co-targeting and it did. That's a fill in the blank. That's the fill in the blank gesture.
I'm happy to jump in on co-targeting.
Great.
I'm Mary Beth with the Capillary Food Bank. So we tested co-targeting just recently in the last 3 months and blew it out of the water. Our ROAS was in the high 20s on the co-targeting. We did it both on appeals and on acquisition. And of course, appeals, the ROAS was much higher, but then acquisition. But we are so happy we're rolling with it in the next this next quarter.
It really goes to a hypothesis that I would like to test somehow that I haven't seen for. Donor fatigue seems to be channel specific. Oh, I keep getting emails from my political party of choice. I am sick of hearing from my political party of choice in email, but I see an ad for it. Okay, I'm engaged there, or I get online ads for it. Maybe that's difficult. And so I wonder if that fatigue is channel specific. And so that gives to sort of that added effect of channels. The other part that I think you're highlighting is the precious thing that we have isn't necessarily our ad budgets, our donors' time and attention. It's how do we maximize that? And there's a way of doing it going deeper, personalization and customization in a mail package, in any sort of channel, usually will pay for itself because it's relatively inexpensive and it ups the relevance quotient. How else can we get it? Well, we can touch them in various ways. We can touch them with all these tactics, these channels that we know work, and they're peanut butter and jelly. They just work better together. Other tests?
Actually, if Mary Beth, if you don't mind, I have a question for you. Thank you. So what led to this particular test in terms of why now, I guess is my question.
Good question. We've talked about this even since last year at this time, and I put it in the budget. Our budget is July 1 through June 30. It was just us getting organized to the point where we could actually implement it well and be able to get good results. And that included building out our database a little bit more. We had to build the basement first. But we did also include, we had started with retargeting first off our website, and we saw great results there on that little simple test. And we don't have it on every page, it's just on certain pages. And we changed the retargeting with the messaging based on what we were putting out in our fundraising efforts. And then finally, this past fall, we were able to organize ourselves to try the co-targeting. And we just put our foot in the water, tested it. It's very inexpensive in terms of the cost. And so we're just like, okay, let's try it. Let's put it in the appeals for 2-3 months. I think we did October, November, December appeals, and we did our fall acquisition campaign. And so that's where we're like, let's try it. It really is inexpensive in relative terms. One of the things we're thinking now is, direct mail is so expensive. So when I sit down and I build in the actual cost of the direct mail and then look at the cost of the co-targeting and then I put it all together, I still have a pretty decent ROAS, but if I pull that cost of direct mail out, could I just get a name and pay 7 cents and shoot a digital series to it? What would happen there? And that's kind of where we're going. We're trying different ways of thinking about, does it need a direct mail? Or maybe it does, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't for appeals, but it does for acquisition. We're thinking through that just to reduce those direct mail costs a little bit. And again, this is not direct mail is ever going to go away. We know it's a part of our life no matter what. It's just how can we improve upon it with all of these different channels. And we're now moving into CTV as well.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad it paid off for you.
And you also highlighted something very important, the building of the basement. We talk about in DRTV especially, like if you don't have your funnels well set up, you don't have an inbound call center, your website isn't good at converting, your DRTV website isn't as good as converting, you can do great ads to a great audience and the rain will fall outside of the Dixie cup that you're trying to use to collect it. So building those funnels, vital work, smart work. So good job. Other questions and comments?
If anybody's feeling intimidated because we're recording, I think, Nick, if you're done with your slides, I could stop recording and then we could, say what's really on top of our mind. And if anybody has spoken and wants it to be edited out of the recording before we share it, you can always let me know.
So before we end the recording, let's just say we are looking for topics. We are looking for tests. We're looking for people who would like to speak. If you're watching this on YouTube afterwards, let us know. We'd love to incorporate you and figure out what our April session is going to be. We'll talk more about that all outside of the recording as well. So now we can start.